A great tactician creates plans. A good tactician recognizes the soundness of a plan presented to him. A fair tactician must see the plan succeed before offering approval. Those with no tactical ability at all may never understand or accept it, nor will such people understand or accept the tactician. To those without that ability, those who possess it are a mystery. And when a mind is too deficient in understanding, the resulting gap is often filled with resentment.
I think the lesson I've always taken from George is be bold and take risks. I think that the thing that George never did was maintain the status quo.
Which is J.J. Abrams.
When Kathleen Kennedy called and asked if I'd be interested in directing this film, I fully intended to say no because I'd been involved in other movies that were sequels, and I just thought I didn't want to do that again. But it was Star Wars, and I knew Kathy. It was all to serve this one and only mandate that we had on this process, which was that we wanted to tell a story that would delight us and that would give us that spark, that feeling that you have when you watch Star Wars. That kind of a feeling of it's yours and you know it. And so when you go back to it, it can't not look the way you remember it. It has to be what you know. And also, well, I want the fans to feel like we're doing this right from the beginning, and is this going to serve them?
Later.
And we looked at Empire Strikes Back for lighting inspiration and for general look, but then when it came time to actually shoot it, I talked to him and I said, we have to kind of cut ourselves loose from the idea of shooting it like a Star Wars movie. I'm making air quotes, meaning that we have to, we got to engage. We got to tell it in a way that's visually exciting for us. And if we are constantly checking each visual decision against like what we think an older Star Wars movie would have been shot like, that's going to be really stifling. We gotta make the gears engage on it, visually.
This business, especially now, things are changing so fast that you can't get stuck in doing the same thing. And I think that that's the exciting thing inside the Star Wars universe.
The thing I think about all the time is the responsibility we have. We've immersed ourselves in everything George created, talked about it endlessly, and we're so excited because I think what you're going to end up seeing, you're going to be so happy with.
There's no way to sugarcoat this. The Rise of Skywalker had a significantly lower opening weekend than The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens. Oh my goodness! Which is only a little better than Rogue One did.
A few later.
I look for people who have something to say. That's the first thing, is when somebody comes in, they have a love of Star Wars, but the second question is, what do you have to say? What are you trying to say in your storytelling? What's important to you?
One of the things for me that I really wanted to acknowledge in the series without getting too heavy-handed about it was this sense that, there's obviously been a lot of focus on Luke Skywalker and his contribution to the galaxy. But I feel like with Princess Leia, I don't think he could have done it without her.
When people come into the Star Wars family and they know as much as Leslie does, and they're steeped in all the lore, that's what was so exciting working with her. She had such a clear vision about what she wanted to do.
This is the truth, is that when I pitched it, because I came in and I pitched my own idea, I didn't come in and say like, what about baby Han Solo? You know what I mean? And I gotta say, Kathy really responded to that. She really felt like that was a pocket of the universe that we had not seen, that nobody else had pitched her. And so I continued to develop it. I turned it into my elevator pitch. I turned it into a bigger, larger pitch for an overall season and series. And then I did a little rip reel for her. So honestly, doing what I did today felt very much like pitching Kathy again.
Meanwhile,
This is a really special series. I mean, going back to Rogue One, and it was a movie that all of us really genuinely were surprised by the response. And the fact that we've now created this series, it's a spy thriller in the Star Wars universe. It's pretty exciting. I actually started working with Tony years ago when I did Born with him. And I think Tony is just uniquely suited to be writing stories like this that are so full of tension and intrigue. And the fact that he's brought that into Star Wars and the building of the rebellion and being able to individualize each of the people that are associated with that, giving us real insight on Cassian Andor.
we've been free range and let run, they really let us run all the way through here, but we have really pushed it. So they wanted something different. The objective is truth. The objective is, can we have absolute realistic behavioral truth in a ripping yarn about revolution? I can't speak for the chorus of opinion that might have been behind the scenes at Disney, but in its front to us, which is Kathy Kennedy and Bob Iger and Alan Bergman and these guys can tell you, we called stuff in from the writer's room. We called stuff in sometimes, emergency call, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Is that going to be okay? Once we left that room and I know it sounds absolutely impossible, but we've never taken a note on 1,500 pages of script. We changed one word in season 1, and legitimately so, and righteously so. They were right.
And I don't think great movies get made by committee. So I never think it's a problem initially to have, 5 or 6 people in a room trying to break story, kicking around ideas. But fairly quickly, I think it needs to come down to either a director that's developing with a writer or a producer working with a writer to create the screenplay. And I think if it's a producer versus a director, I think one of the most important things as a producer that people forget is to listen. Because if you don't listen and you do all the talking and you're trying to tell the writer what you want them to do, then I guarantee you're not going to get a script back that represents any singular point of view, because they're either trying to service you or they're feeling like they're not telling the story that they wanted to tell. And at some point or another, the decision needs to be made. Whose point of view is it? And I'm a big believer in taking the time to find the writer that you respect and you believe in and really cater to their point of view and let them come back with the story. Granted, it can be influenced by the shape you give it, but let them tell the story, because eventually when a director comes on board, if the director didn't have anything to do with the development, they're going to need to make it their own. So that writer is going to end up having, provided you keep the same writer, which you try to, is that writer's going to have to go through another process, a writing process. And what you don't want to do is exhaust the writer so that the writer is trying to please lots of different points of view. And I feel that once you get into a process like that, if it's not managed well from a producing standpoint, then that is exactly the definition of development hell. And when people say, gee, there were all these really talented people, what happened? That's what happened, is that it just got diluted and diluted and diluted, and it lost its point of view.
Each person has goals. Some of those goals are open, visible to all who care to observe. Others are more private, shared only with one's closest friends or associates. Some are dark secrets that one hopes will never see the light of day. But eventually, inevitably, those deepest goals must be made manifest if they are to be reached. They must be opened for someone to hear or see or offer assistance. Everyone who brings those goals into the light must be prepared for either acceptance or rejection. And he must be ready to bear the consequences. All of them.
Like many of my contemporaries on YouTube, I have keenly participated in many a Kathleen Kennedy witch hunt over the last few years. There are fewer things more satisfying to my inner child than demonising the current head of Lucasfilm for her systematic destruction of what was once the greatest film franchise in the world. Whether that was The Last Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi or Ahsoka, she has been a reliable and convenient scapegoat for my nerd rage. However, the first rule of leadership is that you are responsible for your subordinates, whether that be their successes or their failures. And while Kennedy's scorecard is not overtly favourable in that regard, it would taste a lie to say that she does not also deserve credit for the limited successes under her tenure as the head of Lucasfilm. So despite my bias, there I was, fully intending to give Kathy her own portion of my Andor Season 2 review. My god, was that really 2 months ago? Sorry to keep you waiting, team, it will happen again. Rightly acknowledging her backstage shielding and support of Tony Gilroy and the subsequent credit she was due in light of the show's critical success when something occurred to me.
Well, what does it say? Where is it? What's it all about, damn it? Don't keep us in suspense, Serge. This has been a complete fucking nightmare. Just tell us what the fuck is going on!
The question of Kathy Kennedy and her grand designs for Star Wars is not a simple one, and while there is a temptation to fire from the hip with reactionary praise or criticism, depending on the current project, I find that being a reactionist does not lend itself to embracing a wider view of a given subject, particularly when that topic is the target of emotionally charged responses often tethered to one's childhood. Thus, fact is forgotten in favour of fury, and is unlikely to land us anywhere near what could be considered a balanced or in good faith discussion about what are, and what are not, Kathy Kennedy's designs and influences on Star Wars. In broad terms, the public opinion of Kennedy being the successor to George Lucas went from cautious excitement approaching optimism to polarised skepticism and fan outrage to a now cynical apathy that looms over any new project. Why is this the case? Well, in part, it's because Star Wars comes with incredibly high expectations, and she is rightly blamed as the head of Lucasfilm for the high-profile failures occurring on her watch. Failures that include things like firing multiple directors, leading to films created by committee consensus rather than a single vision, boldly announcing new projects to drum up excitement from Disney investors, only to then quietly cancel or indefinitely delay them, the lack of a clear plan for the sequel trilogy after discarding George Lucas's story treatments and then hiring writer-directors with vastly different creative visions for the story. And while the sequel trilogy was ultimately a financial success at the box office, its critical reception from both fans and critics is at best a polarising affair, and at worst, a creative disaster that still ripples through the fandom to this day. And finally, surging Star Wars content on Disney Plus with greatly mixed results, including critical and financial disappointments, through middling successes that were quickly forgotten, to the sparse achievements unlikely to achieve long-term financial success due to their high production expenditure and budget, despite their positive reception. But is all this the fault of Kathleen Kennedy in isolation, or is there more to the story?
What if I told you that the Republic was now under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith?
No, that's not possible. The Jedi would be aware of it.
There is also something to be said about Kennedy's personal politics and her activist aspirations within her chosen field of film. A topic that, despite having merit and probable causality, is rapidly weaponized on the Star Wars battlefront in ill-informed, overheated, and sometimes downright sexist terms that we will also need to wade through if we are to discover the truth of all of this. So it's time to give Kathy credit where credit is due, as we seek to answer whether she is a vanguard of deliberate destruction, that frequently meddles in the creative process to peddle her own equities, a well-meaning, albeit poor creative custodian, or something else altogether. So let's dive right in.
Here we go again.
Alright, let's get the blue elephant in the room out of the way first. Is Kathleen Kennedy a feminist, and do those personal politics and beliefs align with her goals as the head of Lucasfilm that seek to champion women in film?
If into the security recordings you go, only pain will you find.
I must know the truth, Master.
The fact that the company was bought by the Walt Disney Company has been amazing because they very much support the fact that we are trying to grow in the workforce, a number of women in executive positions and in all positions inside the company, and with the movies that we're making and with the protagonists that we're putting in the stories. So I get a huge amount of support with that. But we have 50% of our executive team are women, and 6 out of 8 of the people in my story group are women. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be surprised that we're making Star Wars movies and the majority of the people involved in the development of those stories are women. And I think that it's making a huge difference in the stories that we're trying to tell.
Just then.
Yes, and please note her comments about Disney, they will be important later. Would her goals and aspirations be a problem in any way, shape or form, both in front of and behind the camera, had the sequel trilogy and works on Disney Plus been the unmitigated success, both financially and critically, that Disney were hoping for? No, in fact, I doubt anybody would have even mentioned it. And before everyone shoots from the hip, I am well aware that the sequel trilogy was primarily written and directed by men. Please be patient while I make my point. Everyone has bias and everyone has goals, and seeking to give more opportunities to female filmmakers, as someone who came up through the industry herself when the field was primarily a male-centric domain when it came to established writers and directors, is arguably a very good thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying diversity for diversity's sake is conducive or indicative of quality filmmaking, as it amounts to hiring for quotas rather than on merit. But diversity of experience can lead to unique and new stories from different perspectives, and should be encouraged in a time where Hollywood is growing repetitious. But as I say, it needs to be on merit, otherwise it is tokenism. For better or worse, historically Star Wars was viewed as a male-centered brand, not exclusively but generally speaking. A fact that was not lost on Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney at the time of the Lucasfilm acquisition, who was intently interested in the licensing potential of toy lightsabers and Lego Star Wars toys with young boys. The acquisition of Marvel and Lucasfilm a means to widen Disney's appeal to that particular demographic, in fact. This naturally created tensions between the status quo and established norms of the franchise and the future vision for Star Wars as seen through the eyes of the new Lucasfilm president. And I suppose the tensions to that point are best captured in the widely covered Force is Female photo debacle. The two extremes of the reactions to this photo and subsequent debate online was something to watch, with one side arguing that the photo was proof that Kennedy was a toxic woke feminist trying to poison Star Wars with her own agenda, and the other side arguing that the shirt was merely part of a 2017 Nike campaign for women's sports that had nothing to do with Star Wars, and thus any criticism of it was ill-informed sexism. Naturally, the truth of the matter is neither of these things, but rather something more nuanced. The Force is Female branding was indeed a Nike marketing campaign. However, Kennedy and her husband Frank Marshall wore the shirts, alongside countless others, to the 6th annual Archer Film Festival, hosted by the Archer All-Girls School, to which Kennedy was invited as a keynote speaker. While wearing the shirt, Kennedy spoke of the importance of women in film, opening and closing her speech with quotes from Yoda. The sign-off, and I quote, "There are literally hundreds of people working in areas throughout production, marketing, visual effects, and post-production, and still the majority of those jobs are held by men. These are all jobs that women can do, they just need to be given the chance. That means that unions, studios, producers, directors, and other women in positions of power and responsibility need to make the effort. Do or do not. There is no try. The Force is female." End quote. So when the new president of Lucasfilm, appointed by George Lucas himself, and the proprietor of one of the largest quote-unquote boy brands of merchandise in the world, began publicly speaking in terms of empowering women in film from a top Star Wars soapbox that coincided with the female-led sequel trilogy, it's not a surprise that some reactions online were less than articulate. While I don't believe that the majority of Star Wars fans are sexist chuds that can't stand the idea of women touching their precious Star Wars, there are, unfortunately, enough examples to warrant the claims of sexism in some instances. And the topic of feminism quickly becomes an easy scapegoat argument when the end product fails to live up to expectations, particularly when the target of said criticism didn't so overtly stand on said soapbox until becoming the president of Lucasfilm. What is frustrating about that fact, though, is that there are genuine criticisms that can and should be levelled at Kennedy, and some of the writer-directors that she has hired, both male and female, that get lost amongst the sea of toxicity. None of which are exclusively tied to Kennedy's aspirations to include more women in filmmaking, which, as I said, is an admirable goal for someone in her position, so long as those appointments fall within a meritocracy. Kennedy being a feminist, while a true and provable statement, is not the problem with Star Wars, because, last I checked, not that I've personally verified it, Bob Iger, J.J. Abrams, Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, and even Rian Johnson are all males that share a portion of the blame. It is rather a question of creative competence, trust, and greed that are the real concern here, which would still be the case despite Kennedy's personal agenda. So let's dive a little deeper.
Where is it going? Don't worry, the Force will guide us.
Now, I've said this before, and I will happily say it again. Kathleen Kennedy was, and likely still is, a very good film producer. She has worked with some of the greatest filmmakers of the modern era, including Lucas and Spielberg, on some of Hollywood's most beloved franchises, Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, and Indiana Jones, just to name a few. But she is not a creative person. I raise the point of creative competence because despite her evident prowess as a producer and executive producer, she is not an artist, writer, or fabled auteur. What she has are a very specific set of financial, scheduling and organisational skills that enabled the directors she worked with to achieve their visions on time and on budget. Which, for the bulk of her career, must have seemed like an easy job, given the talent of writer-directors that she had the privilege to work with and ride on the successes of, all of whom speak very highly of her, including the latest addition to that roster, Tony Gilroy. In fact, it was the comments from Tony Gilroy in Vanity Fair that prompted me to go for a bit of a surf through the whitewash of Kennedy's previous writer-directors, all of whom echo the same sentiment, that she is a joy to work for and that she protects their creative vision. From Gilroy, and I quote, "She has protected the show and protected me and wrangled the team together. When we started challenging Kathy just kept saying yes. I'm going to put the first scene in a brothel. Okay. I'm going to have them kill 2 cops. Okay. We want the production designer from Chernobyl. Okay, good idea. She backed our play and got everything that we were doing. We've been through everything, she and I, on this, all the good and all the bad. There's no show without her. For all the shit that she takes online, it's just insane. The show exists because she forced it to happen. What a tough job she has, man." End quote. The same can be said of Rian Johnson, who to this day has nothing but praise for Kennedy for supporting him before, during, and post-production on The Last Jedi. A job that she handpicked him for, might I add. So, if I was to offer some salty conjecture, it does not strain the imagination to infer that perhaps Kennedy isn't a meddler at all, but rather a yes-man. What's the gender-neutral term for a yes-man? Yes-person? Whatever the term is, that simply enables her writer-directors to pursue their vision in hope that they, like the directors of her past, stick the landing. Sometimes it works, a la Andor, and sometimes not, The Last Jedi.
But if she's not reaching into the creative process, how do you explain the ever-growing list of writer-directors that either quit or were removed from Star Wars projects due to creative differences?
An excellent point, pseudo-intellectual tuner, and this is where things get interesting. When do you think the tensions with creative control for Disney Star Wars started?
Well, I think everyone can agree that post The Last Jedi, Disney began to micromanage...
No, my simple vertebrate. You are once again looking at the reaction and not the cause, which is rather appropriate when I think about it, given Disney's direction with the franchise has been highly reactionary, rather than deliberate from the very start. But here's where we go a little bit galaxy brain.
Assuming direct control.
It is very easy to point fingers at Rian Johnson and say that The Last Jedi is where the problem started for Disney Star Wars. In fact, I would wager it would be quite difficult to find a more divisive film in terms of audience reception. Almost by design, some might say.
By sheer coincidence.
I would be worried if everybody across the board was like, yeah, that was a good movie. It's much more exciting to me when you get, a group of people who are like coming up to you and really, really excited about it. And then there are other people who walk out literally saying that was the worst movie I've ever seen. Having those two extremes to me is the mark of the type of movie that I want to make. So.
But as one trained in the Force, you know that true coincidences are rare.
Once we decided that we were making Star Wars movies, he was one of the people that I was immediately interested in. I just think that his storytelling ability and who he is as a human being just exemplified a lot of the values and the sense of fun. I get excited when it feels like it's something new and unique.
Rian delivered the script, I think, the first draft that everybody responded. Kathy and everybody in the studio responded super positively.
I feel like, for better or for worse, when I had my chance at the plate, I swung, and I feel like I was very lucky to get to be, the people at Disney and at Lucasfilm and Kathy Kennedy to protect kind of the creative process so that we could really go in and I could really do what I wanted.
And while it is true that the bubble truly burst for Disney post The Last Jedi, leading to the financial failure of Solo and subsequent postponing/cancellation of their one film per year plan, leading to a protracted pivot strategy that Disney used to desperately right their spinning ship, the problems with Disney Star Wars were present well before everyone's favourite deconstructionist was given free rein with Luke Skywalker. In fact, I would argue that they were inherent at the foundation. While the spotlight of skepticism skepticism caught The Last Jedi dead to rights at the time of release, Patient Zero, i.e. The Force Awakens, more or less slipped past unmolested, at least in the beginning. There are plenty of reasons for that, most of which can be chalked up to naive optimism from people like myself, whom, having grown up in the era of 90s Disney animated films, believed that they were the right choice to shepherd Star Wars forward in the post-prequel era, reinforced by the heavy nostalgic callbacks in The Force Awakens to the original trilogy, reassuring those dissatisfied with the prequels that Disney understood the assignment, all of which were very deliberate choices.
How do you know this?
I would encourage everyone to read Bob Iger's memoir, The Ride of a Lifetime, because within its pages there is some damning evidence to suggest that it is he that is the Phantom Menace of Disney Star Wars, not Kennedy. A man who ultimately failed to establish a firm foundation or plan for the sequel trilogy, despite micromanaging The Force Awakens production.
Your involvement was it was a terrific collaboration. It was incredible fun. Your collaborative style with notes and ideas and iterations, and obviously there were so many iterations of the movie. It felt effortless for me working with you in a way that was kind of great. My question is, how much is that the norm for you on other projects?
In my particular case, and I remember you and I having dinner together around the time you had either just decided you were doing this or you were considering it, and I reminded you that it was a $4 billion acquisition. I think it was $4.05 billion. I
Well, you said it, but you said
I rounded it down.
You said this is a $4 billion movie.
That's right, exactly. And I said, this is a $4 billion movie. You know, I don't know that I was necessarily particularly subtle about it, that because of the size of the acquisition and what this first film represented in terms of importance and value creation, that you can expect that it's not going to be treated like any old film by Disney.
Sure, Kennedy is the face of failure, but she is not its grand architect. Allow me to elaborate. Meeting personally with George Lucas to convince him to sell Star Wars to Disney, Iger effectively manipulated George through ego stroking, fatalistic speeches about his enduring legacy, humouring notions of respecting his characters and ideas for future installments over a private luncheon at Disneyland, only to eventually scrap it all in favour of a safe and soft reboot and retelling of A New Hope, while ensuring that Lucas signed a non-disparage clause to ensure that he did not criticise Disney's work. Iger then effectively handpicked a malleable director in J.J. Abrams, whom he'd worked with in his time at the ABC, to direct his blockbuster on time, on budget, and as instructed. From its inception, The Force Awakens was never meant to be a continuation or successor to George Lucas's work, but simply an assured return of investment to reward the Disney shareholders for their patience, and a vanity project for the CEO of Disney, thus a launchpad for failure. This corporate implementation of films is one of the key factors that caused the collapse of Star Wars as a franchise, because despite decades of evidence to the contrary, companies like Disney still believe creativity can be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet per financial quarter. The self-enforced sprint to Episode 7 by Iger and subsequent forecasted tempo because of promises made to the Disney board that they'd see a mainline Star Wars film in theaters by 2015 was a recipe for unplanned disaster from its inception, and one that was driven by monetary greed rather than creative need.
But what does all this have to do with Kathleen Kennedy?
Patience. Well, when one is given an impossible deadline with no ability to say no, one falls back on what they know. In the case of Kennedy, it was blindly trusting her writer-directors to deliver Star Wars magic without any left or right from Disney, apart from deadlines, nor an inherent understanding of Star Wars herself.
Obviously, George created Star Wars, but all of us had to become, in a sense, students of Star Wars. A real understanding of the history of Star Wars, that was really important. We needed to understand the rules. And once we understood that, then we could branch out.
So long as they were meeting their fiscal obligations to the corporate types like Iger, the board could care less about the story that they were telling, at least until the profit margins started to slip. There is evidence of this with Rogue One, after Gareth Edwards had trouble with the film's production, requiring costly reshoots. Kennedy, probably at the behest of Iger, but we'll never know for sure, called in Gilroy to retreat the script. Regardless of who ordered it, it was a telltale sign that the production was being micromanaged, likely given that it was the first of what was going to be many planned Star Wars spin-offs. But sure enough, the changes, including Darth Vader, were general audience pleasers, and Rogue One went on to be the second financial success of the Disney era, thus reassuring the board that everything was going as planned. And it was in this fateful moment that this jellyfish believes Disney well and truly shit the bed, even if it was an inevitability given the shaky foundation the new era was built on. With 2 Star Wars films in the can, with glowing reviews and profits, I'm sure Iger felt more than comfortable stepping back from the micromanagerial drafting table. After all, Kennedy was chosen by Lucas himself to run Lucasfilm, and now she had delivered a writer that arguably saved Rogue One. So surely her instincts after decades of working with Spielberg and Lucas were on the money with Rian Johnson poised to write and direct The Last Jedi.
Oh shit.
Well, yeah. We all know how that ended. A hugely profitable film, sure, but one that ultimately fractured the fan base beyond repair. So much so that Solo became the first Disney Star Wars project to not make its money back. And then, to add insult to injury, The Rise of Skywalker went on to make less than The Force Awakens. Imagine Return of the King or Return of the Jedi failing to make as much money as their predecessor. Kind of crazy when you think about it. It does happen, of course, even in the prequel era, but never with such direct and enduring decline. But that is the best indicator of the damage that occurred in the wake of Iger's trust in Kennedy, and by extension, her trust in Rian Johnson. Thus, from Solo onwards, the micromanagement began in earnest, despite having the foundations laid by Bob Iger during The Force Awakens. Rise of Skywalker being a perfect case study for what happens when a board loses confidence in its studio, and thus its president's choices in director. Do you think it's a coincidence that the man hand-picked by Bob Iger to write and direct The Force Awakens was recalled to write and direct The Rise of Skywalker? Despite this evident creative meddling of the sequel trilogy and select spin-offs featuring legacy characters, undoubtedly due to the financial concerns of the Disney board, who are now watching their profits decline with each subsequent release, without any real understanding of what had changed between The Force Awakens and now, 2 apparent exceptions to the micromanagement rule appear to have been Andor and The Acolyte, which in terms of their polar opposition in terms of writing quality, really do help to drive home my point. Firstly, I guess we need to ask why these creatives were left alone to pursue their visions without harassment from Disney, when shows like Mandalorian, Kenobi, and The Book of Boba Fett were littered with rewrites, meddling, and course corrections. Well, the answer seems simple enough. Trust and timing. Gilroy, having proven his worth on Rogue One, and with an impressive filmography to his name, was a safe bet for the Disney Plus series. This fact, plus his history working with Kennedy's husband on the Bourne franchise, effectively earned him a free creative pass to deliver a known quantity. A low-risk investment that would have been an easy sell to the Disney board, despite the production costs. It still blows my gelatinous grey matter that Andor managed to get made in that environment, but I guess the brownie points Gilroy garnered from salvaging Rogue One's script were worth the investment in his talent. So, all things being equal, Kathy deserves as much credit for Andor as she does for The Last Jedi, being that she selected the writer-director based on their previous work and let them pursue their vision. And we as Star Wars fans got to reap the reward of a deliberately planned show created with talent, purpose and passion. Oi Disney, release Andor Season 2 on physical media already and recoup some of your losses before Disney Plus implodes and we lose it forever. The inverse, and Headland on the other hand, was simply in the right place at the right time. Following her successful streaming debut with Russian Doll and riding the peak wave of 2019 DEI, when she pitched her female-centric Jedi story to Kathleen Kennedy, whom, as we've discussed, could see the stars align with her personal socio-political goals and the desires of Disney to expand their stories to include more written by women. And with this pitch from such an enthusiastic quote-unquote Star Wars fan, I'm sure she was only too eager to enable The Acolyte. I can actually envision the passionate speech Kennedy pitched to get the show greenlit. What did George always say about the Sith again? Regardless, while Kennedy may have sought them out, approval was ultimately granted for the project via the Disney board, whom I'm sure were comfortable with Andor because it was a low-risk venture from a trusted industry veteran with previous Star Wars credentials, and with the Acolyte because of its topical and timely alignment to the cause of the day and Disney's diversity equities, not to mention the reduced risk of brand damage due to the lack of principal legacy characters. Boy, I reckon I wish they could have their time again with the Acolyte. Holy shit. But what does this Kennedy-approved content of sheer polarization between Lucas Star Wars consistency tell us? It tells us that Kennedy does not, has not, nor will she ever understand Star Wars. And if one does not understand something, how can one possibly be accused of deliberately trying to bring it down? No, there's no malice in any of this. Just misunderstanding, incompetence, and impatience fueled by Hollywood greed.
Greed can be a powerful ally.
Right, that's enough Galaxy Brain for now. To conclude, Kathy is not a creative herself. She is a manager who lacks understanding, and thus easily falls victim to snake oil salesmen, as well as genuine writers alike. Which is impressive given how long she's worked in Hollywood. You'd really think she'd know better by now. That said, despite her lack of understanding, she believes in and shields her artists' visions, where they align with the Disney party line, and if she can peddle her own equities, all the better. That is, unless the risk threshold is too high and jeopardizes the quarterly financial spreadsheets of the Disney board, at which point the true micromanagement phantom menace that lay the foundation of this failure manifests. G'day, Bob. So, while I guess the Court of Brainless Wisdom determines that Kathy is not a deliberate vanguard of destruction, nor exclusively a mean-spirited idealist, despite being a proven feminist, she is a bit of a naive yes person that has cultivated more failures than successes. And this is due to a total lack of creative understanding that has ultimately tarnished the works that came before. I would thus encourage her to scuttle away before Mando and Grogu splats all over our screens like a pelican shit on a car windshield, and she wears the credit for that too. I say that because it, unlike the Rey movie, at least has a release date, which gets less and less likely to see the light of the silver screen with each passing update.
What do you suppose that is?
So, full credit where credit is due. Kathy, thanks for Andor, but we're not going to overlook the rest of your Star Wars portfolio. But remember, I'm just a brainless lump, inconsistently uploading brain dumps to my little corner of YouTube. Sorry for the delay, guys. As I said, it will probably happen again. Hooroo, Skipper.